So Hungary's involvement in the European Union, as well as its subsequent relationship with the Union, is not without its hurdles. And without further ado, we do have a guest to tell us more about these relations.
And now we welcome Dr. Edith Zgut-Przybylska, assistant professor in the Institute of Philosophy at the Polish Academy of Sciences and a visiting fellow at the CEU Democracy Institute. Welcome to TVP World, and thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, with Donald Tusk's government in power, where do we see Polish-Hungarian relations going from here onwards?
Well, these bilateral relations certainly got tense since Viktor Orban just got Donald Tusk in the personality of Donald Tusk, a serious adversary. Once they have been fighting on the same side of the European People's Party. But in the meantime, the Hungarian government get itself kicked out, actually moved out before it was kicked from the most influential European party. So right now it's in the no man's land. And it also means that all those differences with the new government in Poland with regards to Russia and Ukraine, they seemed a lot more visible than it was before, because actually it looks like that Donald Tusk is willing to pick up a fight and stand up against the democratic backsliding and authoritarian turn of Viktor Orban, as we have witnessed in the last couple of months already.
Right, there seems to be an anti-European, Eurosceptic image of Hungary, but does that correlate with the people? How do the Hungarian people see the European Union?
This is a very interesting question, because actually, the good news is that 70% of the Hungarians declared that the EU membership is a very positive thing. So the freedom of movement is one of the most appreciated. They can work abroad, live and study abroad, which means that the membership itself, the core idea itself, is supported by the majority. But the big picture is not that rosy. The bad news is that it doesn't mean that the Hungarians did not respond to this very Eurosceptic, anti-Western propaganda of Viktor Orban in the last 14 years, or that they want even deeper integration, for instance, to move forward, to get more Europe over time. I think just like most of the Central Eastern European countries, Hungarian society had a very high expectation that the EU accession is going to level up their living standards, that we will live like in the West, like in Germany and Austria. And today, around 40% would say, and this is crucial, that while the European Union should keep sending this money, this tremendous amount of EU funds that contributed to the economic development of Hungary, but at the same time, it should not have a say about domestic politics whatsoever. And this is crucial because it shows how successful exactly this campaign was in the last 14 years. And the Hungarian government keeps saying that we should not let Brussels to dictate us. And I think they have a huge responsibility that the Hungarians favor a lot stronger member states with very strong sovereignty and less Europe. And not to mention this 15-20% of Hungarians would want to leave the European Union completely. But this is just a marginal flank, so this is not dominant. The bottom line here is that the Hungarian attitude towards the EU is largely shaped by the actual negative campaigns of the government. So when they're pushing this campaign that the EU is forcing Muslims onto us and suicide bombers, the people are blaming Brussels for migration, or whether they are blaming EU for high inflation, Hungarians are blaming Brussels for the economic sanctions against Russia. So this is a very successful, I would say, strategy overall, unfortunately, and this is even more unfortunately, in the long run, undermining a huge trust within the European Union in the Hungarian society.
I wanted to ask about the Orban government, which portrays the EU as a hostile actor that threatens Hungarian values and Hungarian interests. Could you tell us a little bit about why that is the case? Perhaps if you could just illustrate what these Hungarian interests and values are. Perhaps that could help us understand what that clash is really about.
What we need to understand is that Viktor Orban and his government, when they took power again in 2010, they took a strong authoritarian turn. So the government started to undermine democracy, the rule of law, captured all sphere of the state, the judiciary, the media, culture, and the economy. And of course, it led to a tremendous amount of tension with the EU institutions already back then in 2012. So this was technically the political and institutional environment that I would say embedded this Eurosceptic kind of governmental attitude, that the government eventually built up a very strong anti-EU, anti-Western campaign, which was ironically financed by EU money. So these EU funds were misused to maintain the power of the prime minister, to feed the clientelist system around him. And I think one of the downsides of this kind of whole EU accession, if we can name one, is that the EU was simply not prepared for such an authoritarian turn with its own house. I mean, EU accession and Europeanization is the very best thing that could have happened to Hungary, but at the same time, it largely contributed to this kind of authoritarian system building. And the European Union was simply financing this authoritarian project way too long. And although we see that Brussels is a lot more assertive today, like it started to withhold EU funds, as it has been told by your colleague, it did not really change the operation of Mr. Orban's corrupt informal regime. It is still pushing this conspiracy of the time started to China, Russia.
Oh, we seem to be having a little bit of...
This is a big threat for the European integration as a whole.
All right, we apologize. There seem to be a little bit of technical issues. We will get it sorted out real soon. But as our guest was saying, this Orban's government seemed to have eroded a little bit of their credibility when it comes to being a part of the European institution.
But it's quite interesting to see that the society itself seems to be quite pro-European. I'd be really quite interested to see what our guests might be able to say.
Right, exactly. When we see the polling numbers, Orban even still is enjoying majority support. That number is dwindling. So we might see a change going forward into the European Parliament elections. And
might be able to reconnect now.
Yeah, let's see. Hello, hello.
Hello? Do we have a connection? Can you hear us? Edith, yes?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Oh, that's
I don't
good.
know where exactly you lost me.
No, I think we got the main gist of what you were telling us. I just wanted to also ask about Hungary losing its credibility as a European partner, because both in that geopolitical sense, but also from the point of view of foreign investors. Can you tell us a little bit about that, perhaps, over the last few years?
Yes, exactly. So where I wanted to get to the end of my thoughts is that while there is a lot of isolation within the EU, there is a lot more strengthening economic and political ties with external factors like China or Russia today. And as I said, the more the country gets isolated within the mainstream forces of Europe, the more Viktor Orban is trying to build alliances with authoritarian radical forces also inside and outside of the EU. And I think right now attracting Chinese and Russian and other kind of Asian shady investments, it became a top priority because he wants to make the country as an economic bridgehead of China. And at the same time, Hungary's energy dependency on Russia remained very strong despite the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So we can see that all these factors would show that Hungary is trying to keep slowing down EU decisions that are powerful for the and the core. It's important is that it is to maintain the sustainability of the regime itself. I mean, let's not forget that EU funds are not flowing Hungary to that much as it was flowing before since 2022. So the Hungarian government is doing everything in order to get foreign direct investment coming to maintain this kind of clientelist corrupt system. To feed the clientelist network, to help Mr. Orban also to depict himself as a global key player and doing business with this kind of dictatorships. I think it also creates a little bit of wiggle room for the Hungarian prime minister when it comes to negotiating with the EU. And I think it also makes sense if you think about it, why Fidesz, the governing party, is trying to build bridges towards radical far-right parties, Eurosceptic populists within the EU itself. The more it gets isolated, wants to try to help those parties like Marine Le Pen's or others to come into power and to make it easier for him to maneuver within this European house in the future.
Indeed, very interesting insight there, Edith. Thank you very much for all that. It will be interesting to see what the European parliamentary elections will bring in just over a month. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Edith Zgut-Przybylska, Assistant Professor in the Institute of Philosophy at the Polish Academy of Sciences and Visiting Fellow at the CEU Democracy Institute. Thank you very much for joining us at TVP World.